All right. So why do you guys think that it failed?
Can you just scroll up so I can see what you named the variable? Variables totals.
It's actually, we know it works because look, the console log is telling us that
Yep.
something is working, right? So it's not like that.
You're not adding it to the HTML of the page.
Yeah, I think that was Derek, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I do like 95% server side programming. so so yeah, it's really easy to forget to do document dot body dot enter HTML. I don't know, and let's say it's equal to the output. Cool. So if we can just see post 1 and 2, cool, works. All right, all right. Now let's do something like this. Let's think about this intuitively. What were to happen, and now in a real world scenario, let's say you have, I'm just going to draw it out here. Let's say you have, I don't know, some users, right? Right? And they're like making posts on Facebook, for example, right? Or let's say a blog, right? And what happens is this. Let's say, I don't know, you have like post, like, blog one, blog two, and so on, right? Is it, you follow me here? Right?
Mhm.
So let's say you're like writing blog three. So let's say you're writing blog three, right? When you hit submit, right? When you submit, what actually happens here? It sends an AJAX call, right, to the server, right?
Hmm.
So what does the server do then? Then the server thinks thinks about what was sent. Wow. I'm not trying to write JavaScript. Take it easy. And then what it does is it says, okay, it will say if valid, like let's say you have some validation, right? So if it's valid, then save it to the database, right? Which in this case is like, let's say posts, right? So what actually ends up, not debugger, so what actually ends up happening is this here, and then let's say you display all the posts on an index view, right? Does this all make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So, but what happens between here? So what happens in between here? Now, in between here and here, right? Between sending the AJAX call and displaying it, what happens here? The server, this takes time, right? Let's just say it takes, I don't know, let's say it takes, I don't know, 1 second, right? So let's kind of build that into it. Do you guys agree? No?
Yeah.
Cool. So the idea is like we're just going to mimic how a server works. So let's do that. How we're going to do that? You guys have used set timeout, right?
Yep.
So set timeout actually accepts a callback function. And what it does is it accepts a callback function. The function is anonymous. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put everything inside the callback function. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but accepts time here. Correct?
Yeah, it does. Yep.
Okay, cool. So let's test it out. Boom. See that? Takes a second, right? So that's kind of like how a server works. Like you go to a site, right? And like let's even test it out here. You guys ever use the network pad? You ever see this?
Barely, yeah.
Okay, so let's see. It's going to say boom, boom, boom. Look at all these resources. Boom. Status 200, 4 milliseconds. Right? Let's click on this. Next one. Boom, boom, boom. It's making a request somewhere. Okay, didn't show me that request. They're hiding it. They don't want me to know what their API is. But you see the load time? Right? So it's just making a bunch of requests. Let's say google.ca, I don't know. I'm feeling lucky today. Let's do it. See how lucky we are. Okay, you see that? 134 milliseconds, right? So you guys are getting the point here, right? So if we do the same here, we should, actually we're not, yeah, because we're not calling the server. Anyways, so you get the point, right? We're kind of mimicking the way the web works itself. So cool, we're good on that. So now let's go back to create a post. And this is where, sorry? Hello? Are you okay? I'm going to assume that you're okay. Cool. So let's go back to create a post, right? And this is where it actually starts to get really interesting, at least for me. And this is exactly how I started to learn callback functions. I started to play around like this. Because initially I was kind of curious, you know, they taught me a bunch of stuff, and then I was playing around and I was like, well, what's the use? Like how does it even work? Like where does it even make sense? So let's play around a little bit here. So let's say create a post accepts a post, right? Which is this here, right? Which is valid JSON. Well, it's a valid object, let's say. And let's say it's an array, so we can do the push method on it, right? We're going to do a post here. Cool. So let's call it, boom, you get 3 in a row. You see how it's instant, right? You guys agree that that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's spice it up. But we know, intuitively, we know that's not how the web works, right? We know for a fact that's not how the web works, because it gets requests and it takes time for it to finish. 2 point something seconds, right? So let's say that when we create a post, so let's say writing this post, we save it, we submit it, so we're creating a post here. Let's say the server takes 2 seconds. Server takes 2 seconds. 2 seconds to load, to save the record. Okay? Cool. So let's do a set timeout here again. That accepts a function callback. Yeah, let's do a function anonymous. And we're gonna push the post. And again, we're gonna do, okay, so let's walk through this. You guys follow me on this so far?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Derek, you're on board?
Yep.
Cool. Just let me know if there's anything that you want me to go over, okay? This is somewhat simple stuff, but you're going to see actually a lot of cool things coming out of this one. Okay, so we have a backend, pretend. We have a create, so our post method, and we have a get method, okay? So we all know JavaScript is asynchronous, right? We all know this. So intuitively what's going to happen is it's going to create the post and then it's going to get the post, right? Now, they're both going to run at the same time, right? Which one intuitively is going to be faster?
first one.
The create a post you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Cool. What do you think, Martin?
I think the same thing.
Okay. Derek, you're on board?
Sure.
Wow. Okay, cool. So
Are we over three?
so apparently you all agree. So let's find out, right? This is a question that I have too, right? I mean, I know the truth, but so let's see what happens here. We run the callback. Wait a minute. Where's post 3? How does that even work? Now if I refresh, but where's post 3? Now, do you know why we don't have post 3?
Because you're not calling get post again.
Well,
It's called once before the post 3 is added. Or
is
it's,
is it really though?
hold on. Scroll up.
Because it's waiting for something else to happen?
So you haven't created it. It gets it before it's created. Get post has a delay of 1 second, but create post has a delay of 2 seconds.
Perfect. So Derek, you're on the right track. But what if I were to tell you that all 3 are there? Does that make sense at all? It's weird, right? So let's back it up a little bit. I know you guys are like, whoa, what the hell just happened, right?
No, it's because the post.for each executes right away, so it adds it to posts. So in line 19. So even though you're calling the set timeout function, line 19 is run. It's just maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
No, you're on the right path. No, so intuitively, we would say, okay, I'm gonna add the post, and they're gonna call all the posts. Now, because of, and this is a good example of how the web works. So intuitively, you send it. So let's follow the logic a little bit. So a user creates a post. They're writing the post. They submit it. So we submit it. We create the post, right? The server takes about 2 seconds, a second to read it, a second to save it. Now, at the same time, you're also calling get post. So what ends up happening is, although the record exists on your database, you're actually not correctly displaying it. And this, even though we're using a set timeout, all the set timeout does is mimic a server response. So this is something that you guys got to be aware of, that like, just even though you're coding something, you also have to be aware of how the interaction between the server and the user and the application happens, right? So this is actually a precursor to how we actually get callback functions to work. So what ends up happening is we start basically doing something like an async await, which I think you guys said you didn't really touch, right?
No,
Okay, cool.
not me.
No, that's no problem. That's no problem. So we're not actually going to use async await or promises, but we're going to create an async await example using callbacks. Okay? And this actually is going to kind of tie in a lot of the stuff that we did, and then we're going to go into closures, which is a lot more advanced. Okay? So this was a little bit of a slight review. Does this stuff make any sense?
Yes.
Yep.
I don't understand the rendering yet, but I get the main logic.
Okay, cool. So let's say app2.js. I don't know, whatever. So we're going to say git diff. The backend. Cool. So we're going to say implemented a get and post and mimicked.
I always thought you had to write out git commit. I take it you don't.
That's part of the tooling that Derek wanted to ask me.
Okay, because
It was-
GA add GC git commit.
Yeah, I use an alias because I'm lazy.
So am
I'll make you all into lazy programmers. That much I promise. It's part of the agenda. And then actually I talked to Derek, and we were talking about maybe doing some tooling as a result.
I
Actually,
do that.
you were here for that actually. So, okay, anyway, so let's just mimic, create the post and mimic the way a server slash client interaction works with Ajax. Let's clear the console. Cool. So we're gonna do what? Touch app2.js. Okay, we're gonna do app2.js. Okay, so we're gonna use our handy dandy same thing. We're gonna use a little bit of ES6 here for funsies. We're gonna say posts. Let's just do this. Come on. And okay, so now what we're going to do, and the reason why I'm putting this side by side is let's do it in a way that we can see the difference, okay? So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to get the post, same thing, post title, callback that has a set timeout. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create the same post, and we're going to get the posts, and we're going to essentially do the same thing here. Create post is not defined. Really? You don't say. Okay. Okay, cool. So this is where the main difference is going to be. We're going to say create posts. Is it plural? No, post. Not create pot. So what we're going to do here, remember this took a post, right?
Yeah.
And I believe we also did a set timeout. And that accepts a function callback. That accepts a function anonymous. And it's, I believe we did a 2-second, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So we have the scaffold. Now, posts dot push post. Okay, so we have essentially the same thing here, right? Where does it differ? We're going to pass a callback function here, right? So how do we pass a callback function? We've seen this before. I'm just going to write callback. Cool? And what we're going to do is we're going to invoke this callback. So what are we going to do? Let's follow the logic here. So we're going to invoke the callback. Invoke the callback. And the callback can be any name. So it can be called anything we want. And actually that's it. It basically just runs the function that is passed in. Okay, so I just put this little blurb for all of us, right? Does that help, this little blurb, or should I just stop doing that?
It's helpful.
Okay, so let's do get status. You notice I always do get status on every single command. Get used to it. Do get status, and then I do get difference. There's no difference because I didn't commit anything. So I'm going to do get add, get commit, created the callback example. Get status, working clean. Okay, cool. And I could just do, oops, and then you can do get log later on. Get log if you really want. You can see the head. Anyways, so using this logic, here, what do you think I got to do to make this run? Because intuitively right now, it just does the same thing, right? We get a little bit error that callback is not a function, obviously, because it's not. It's undefined, right? So what do you think intuitively? What do you think I got to do here?
Define callback.
Well, yes and no, because you see, this is invoke the callback. So invoke the
You
callback.
have to invoke the callback.
You have to put posts inside of the callback. Wouldn't you?
Okay, so we have one theory, define the callback. We have another theory, put posts inside the callback, right? And Derek, what do you think?
Sorry, I'm multitasking. I'll let other people answer this one.
You
Well,
have to invoke it.
sorry, Derek. Everybody already got their turn, but okay, cool. So Derek is neutral. Okay, cool. Basically, I see where you guys are going, and it does have some sound logic, and this is why I wanted to come back to this example because it shows that callbacks are really, really tricky. So one thing you have to remember is that this is completely arbitrary. I could call it make soup today. What in the heck? I don't know. Let's just call it make soup today. Right? It's going to do exactly the same thing. Oops, I put it in the wrong spot. No, I did. Make soup today. Make soup today. Cool. Now, it's going to give us the same error, which is make soup today is not a function. Now, it does create the post, right? But here's the thing. It doesn't display it. So what we got to do, actually, is we have to pass the callback to that. Now, create the post accepts two functions, right? Let's call... All we're going to do here is we're going to pass get post. Does that make sense? Now watch what it does. 1, 2, 3.
Hey,
Does that make sense? Like, watch this. I can call it whatever I want. It will always work. Now the reason why, okay, we just call it callback so that it's easy to understand. The reason why is this is arbitrary. Just like post is arbitrary. Posts, plural, is not. But the post, so variable names are just arbitrary when they're passed into a function. What matters is what you actually pass to the function when you invoke it. Okay? That's the biggest takeaway here. But aside from that is this displays the power of a callback. What ends up happening is in order for you to pull the records in a synchronous way, you have to make sure that you pass a callback in here in order to pull that data. And that's kind of like what mimicking a server response is. By the way, hey Celia. So this is kind of like I put the answer. I'm going to put the answers up for you, Celia. We're just doing a fun little example of how a server works and how to mimic and why callbacks also are important. Okay, so let's follow the logic here again. In this one, you will never see that third post ever. It exists, it just never renders. In this example, the reason why the post works is specifically because we know that after this function runs, before it times out, it's going to make sure it calls the get post. So you call get post, you get the first two, and as soon as the server is done saving a record into your database, it will automatically re-render that. So as far as we're concerned, it looks like it's only rendering one thing, but it's actually doing it twice. It's just it only updates the DOM with one item. And that's kind of like the idea of where a lot of this stuff starts to come along. Does that make any sense? No?
Can you go over one more time on the logic? And what's being called and
Cool.
so it's
So let's start off with our friend the app.js. Right? So as you can see here, how does it execute? It says, okay, it calls create a post, then it calls get post. But we know that it's asynchronous. So what we're doing here is we're essentially mimicking the server response. So because the server will respond after a get request, a post request is always slower than a get request, right? Because it's much faster to get records that exist than it is to write a record and then display it. Because there's a couple of actions that have to happen, right? So that's the reason why this doesn't display. As Derek had pointed it out, that get post is much faster. So how do we fix that? Well, we need something called a callback, essentially. And all the callback does is it does exactly the same thing that we're doing here, but what happens is when it saves the post, it automatically calls the get post again because we pass it in. So we call get post to display the initial value, right? So we call get post, this is get post firing, and then because this is on a delay, it resolves the callback. Were you able to understand a little bit better, Martin?
so you're passing get post. What does get post have again? You said
Let's do it like this. Maybe it'll be
it's
easier
like
to
a function, right? Yeah.
get post is exactly a function. Get
Yeah.
post is this function
Oh,
here,
okay, I get it. Yeah, that's the third element.
right? Because what happens is we basically modify. All we did was one small modification. We added this parameter and invoked this parameter. That is the only difference. That is literally the only difference between the two. Which is such a small thing makes such a big difference. And that's why I wanted to show you guys, like, that is the power of the callback. Because it essentially can perform an action for you, which normally you would not be able to do in a timely fashion. I know that's within this context, right? Okay, cool. So what time is it? 8:09? Cool. So let's do a little bit of closures. Let's do some closure stuff. Now, I warn you, closures is fun with a nervous laugh. Let's see, I'm just checking out my notes here. Let's see here.
Well, this is going to take us back into scope, isn't it?
Sorry?
Or closures taking us back into scope.
What scope?
The concept of scope.
Kind of, yeah. So basically, closure is when a function can use the variable of a function that has already returned. That's basically what a closure is. And it's like when an inner function always has access to the variables and parameters of its outer function, even after that function has returned. I mean, I think that's about as close as we can get to that. Let me see here. So let's see what we got here. Let's do something else here. Let's do make directory closures and cd closures ls. Okay, so let's do a touch index.html. Let's do a touch script.js. Let's do a git init. Right, let's do a first commit. Cool. So how can I get you started with closures here? Okay, cool. Let's do a code open. Okay, let's do. Okay. Let's do nothing too crazy here. Let's call this closures. And in the body, let's just say H1 advanced JS continued closures. Cool. We need a script tag, right? And it's script.js. Cool. All right. Cool. So let's start off with closures. Okay, so was the definition that I gave you guys, did that make any sense whatsoever? At all? No? Okay. Sorry.
For me, I kind of get it, but yeah, if you can show examples, that would be even better.
I'm getting to it. I'm getting to it, my friend. So, okay, so let's go over that again. Let's just say it's basically when an inner function always has access to the variables and parameters of its outer function, even though the outer function has returned. So remember when you're doing functions that return functions? So it's kind of like that, but what happens is when the outer function returns, it's done, right? So when a function returns, it's done, right? But what happens is its scope is actually still in the execution stack. So like when the call is made, right? It's added to the execution stack, right? When it returns, then it pops off the execution stack. Has anybody talked to you about the execution stack at all? Any one of you guys?
No.
Execution stacks, scope stack. Okay, so execution stack is like really simple. Let's do. What is execution stack JavaScript? Okay, let's see. Let's see some images. Cool, actually, yes. Which one is here? Advanced JavaScript. What is execution context? Call stack, execution context, global memory. I think this one's not too bad. Current context, previous execution. No. Bad. This is not too bad. Okay, cool. So, what is the execution context? The execution context is a few things. So, the call stack is like all the hoisting and everything we talked about. Then you get into the execution context. So like what's actually being called at the moment. Okay. So what happens is, let's say you make a function call, goes into the execution stack. Think of it as like a waiting line, right? Everybody's waiting in line to get into the subway, right? And then the subway has those like whatever, what are those called? It's not revolving door. What are those little things that spin that let you through the little spot? Do we know? The gate? Cool. So think of like there's different functions waiting in line to get through the gate to get into the subway, right? So as soon as it's done, it pays its fare or does what it has to do, and it leaves the execution context. Now, if you have a function that returns a function, what happens is, even though the original one has popped off the execution stack, everything that it has in scope still remains in the global memory. And we're going to see a little bit more about that. And I wish there was a better example of it. Cool. So function B, function A calling function B, and then function A. So you can see here, the first one that pops, right, is A, and then B. Does that make sense? I don't think I did a super job of explaining it, but we'll see it. We'll see it more in practice here. How about that? Cool. So let's just say, what's something fun to calculate? Let's check years before I retire. I don't know. Want to do that? Let's do that. Okay, function. Let's say retirement, right? And it's going to take a retirement age, right? So I'm going to say, I don't know, let's say, just bear with me here. So let's say that is, we're going to use non-ES6. Should I use ES6? No, let's use ES6 here. Template literals, okay? So this is going to return, actually no, we kind of need this. A is equal, it drives home the point. A is equal to years left until I can peace out. Not literally. Okay, we'll do this. Peace out from work. Okay, so we're going to return, and what are we going to return? We're going to return a function here, and it's anonymous, because remember, a function can only return an anonymous function. You can't return a named function, okay? So that's one of the key differentiators, and it's going to be this other function. It's going to accept a year of birth. By the way, Derek, I figured out why our year of birth thing wasn't working last time, in case you were wondering.
Yeah, it's because we were passing the year instead of the amount of years. Like the current year.
Yes, but I'll show you now. But I made a boo boo last time. I made a boo boo. It's okay. We'll live. Show you how it. I was thinking about it later on, and I thought of you, but I forgot to message you. Okay. Anyway, so let's say this takes an age, and the age is 2016 minus year of birth, right? Because that makes sense. Or, sorry, what am I saying? 2018, right? 6 and an 8, because that makes sense. And let's just say it logs retirement age minus age. Yes, this has to be an operation. Just plus A. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's just take a step back here. Do you guys understand what I did here? think
Yeah.
about it. I'm gonna.
Calculating the age.
I'm just gonna write here. Well, you guys look at. It always has access to the variables and parameters of its outer function, even if the outer function has returned, popped off the execution stack. The scope remains in memory for the children to use. Cool. Okay, so let's follow this here. We have a function that returns a function. We kind of did this before, right? So we have a function, it has a variable, right? When you call this function, we're going to use this variable. We'll call it a, but let's just say, let's make it more explicit. Let's just say, I don't know, sentence, or, yeah. Cool. So essentially, when you got a sentence here, right, it belongs to the parent function. Now, this function right here is nested inside. It returns. So as soon as I run this one, the return value is going to be this particular function. So intuitively, the way we understand the way functions work is when a function returns, it's done. When that function is done, it pops off the execution stack. In other words, it's gone from the code being run. And the way closures work is that this variable here remains in memory so that you can use it here. Okay? That's essentially what this meaning here is stating. Okay? Are there any questions about that? Are you guys good with that?
Mhm.
Celia, Derek, you're good with that?
Yep.
Cool, because
Yep.
cool. Okay, so what is the real meat and potatoes about this? And it's the main important idea here is that the scope chain, okay, remains intact. And this is really, really important because we're going to see some real world application to this. And essentially, what's important is that you're going to find a lot of software out there has this pattern so that they can reuse other portions of code, but still not call the original function, just whatever that return function is. So how do you even access this? So let's just say var retirement age, right? Because that makes sense. Let's invoke that, right? Actually, no, let's do this. Because retirement takes a retirement age. So let's just do something like this. Retirement age, I don't know, in Russia? Belgium, it's possible to retire. Okay. Retirement Belgium is equal to retirement at 60. Does this make sense? We're missing a var here. Cool. So what are we really doing here? We're just saying, okay, the retirement in Belgium is actually 60. Because all we're going to do, our intent here let's open this. our intent here is to console log a sentence, right? So our intent here, it should log X number of years until I peace out from work, right? That's what our goal is, right? So we know from functions returning functions that this is actually not enough. What this actually does is when you call retirement Belgium, okay, and you make it equal to retirement 60, so you make it equal to this function, what it's actually doing is returning this function, right? And all it does is it accepts the year of birth, right? So what are we going to do here? We're going to say retirement, let's say, let's do a couple more here. Which one did we see? We saw Russia, I believe. At 62. Okay, what's the retirement age in Canada? 65, right? Ontario? And
There isn't a mandatory retirement age.
okay. Well, let's just suppose. Let's just say, okay.
We're never getting to Belgium.
Yeah, we're all moving to Belgium, man. Forget this. I'm not working that long. Okay, let's just say Russia. Russia, I'm 67. I don't know. Let's just make it up. Okay, cool. So we have 3 things to look up. So how does this work? So now we know retirement, Belgium, retirement, Ontario, retirement, Russia. Oops. Russia, right? So someone tell me, how do I actually get the sentence out? There's 2 ways to do it. We did it last time.
Document right?
No.
Actually, we could call the order function in the inner function, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like side point.
Yes, Celia. Awesome. Okay, so in case you guys didn't hear that, so basically Celia is saying, okay, let's call the inner function, right? So there's 2 ways to do that. So we're going to do it, let's do method 1, method 2. And this is, by the way, this is not a gimmick, this is not ES6, this is actually straight built into JavaScript. It's not syntactical sugar or anything. So let's just say the person who's in Belgium is born in 1991. Let's say a person works since 1984. I don't know. And let's say the person in Russia is born in 1950. I don't know. Let's say, I don't know, 2010. Oh, that's slave labor, isn't it? 8 years old? I don't know. I don't know if Trilogy would be down with that. So, okay, cool. So let's just do one at a time here. Right? What happened to my thing? Retirement. Closures, this one. Cool. So I have 33 years left until I peace out from work. So what does that tell us? So you can see how that works, right? So all I did here was I have a sentence and I'm concatenating that sentence to this calculation. Okay? But I'm accepting a variable, okay, after the function has closed. So intuitively, that's a little bit crazy. Like honestly, when somebody first showed me this, I was literally like, what in the hell? And it took me some time to get this. And this is actually super, super used. So recommend you go over this and try to digest it. It's actually the culmination of all the work we did last Wednesday. Okay? And where this matters, so let's just do the next one. This person has 31 years left, which makes sense. And this person has 57. So let's do a console log here. Right? Okay, so we have a break here. So what's the second method? We actually don't need to call it twice. We don't need to store it in a variable. We could just go like this. It's just that it's less intuitive, right? And then we can go 1991. See how it produces the same result? This is what Celia was talking about. Am I right with that assumption, Celia?
Yes. Yes,
Cool.
that's what I was talking about.
Cool.
Yeah, this method too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's up to you how you guys want to do it. Personally, this is a lot easier to understand. It's not easier to understand. It's harder to follow because you got to look at the original variable. But this is a lot easier to kind of follow through, right? And then you can see here where it tells you retirement age is actually year of birth, right? Which could be anything. So VS Code actually gives you a little bit of hint here. And you can see here that even though retirement age is equal to this function, it's actually telling you that it's returning another function because it's expecting another parameter. And then let's just do...
So it's in the retirement Belgium, for example, are you passing a second parameter when you put the 1991?
Correct. What I'm actually doing is I'm passing the 1991 to our return function.
Oh, okay.
That is the secret behind it. And don't, honestly, it's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's hard. And even if when it comes into practice, I had a lot of looking at spaghetti code and trying to figure out how it works. I mean, at least would have been nice if somebody kind of told me how it works, but that's not the way life is sometimes, right? But the point here is that you're going to see this pattern a lot because it kind of shields variables away. And this function is already finished running. It's out of memory. So it's already gone. It's done. But you can still do stuff with it. And that's kind of like the power of a closure because you're actually getting access to variables which are already done. So what this is usually called is called lexical. They're written lexically. You guys know what lexical is? Yes, no? Lexical.
I remember something about lexical scope, but
Yes.
is that the one? Yeah.
So lexical scope is a very powerful concept. Lexical scope is variables declared outside of a function are global variables and visible anywhere inside the JavaScript program. So how does that relate to this? This is not in the global scope, but all lexical means is that it works top, down, top, down. Even though this function already finished running, it's done, because of lexical scope, it still has access to sentence. Normally, you wouldn't, right? But only if it returns a function itself. Because when you save it or you invoke it, it actually saves all that data. It saves the scope and its arguments into this execution context so that you can call it. Okay, so let's do another example. You guys remember the interview question example that I did? It was in the last class. Let me see if I can get that file. You guys remember what I'm talking about, right? Remember it was like a function returning a function?
Sorry, just before you go, like further, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, what's up?
Look for method one. When you borrow the return of Belgium, Ontario, and Russia, why did that's the name of the function, right? Returning Belgium.
So you're talking about this here, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then,
That variable is actually a function.
yes. Okay, so let's see here. So let's do, which is a good question. So let's do a console log of retirement. I just want to make sure I don't misspell it. So this is actually what you get back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that just shows that it's a function, right?
Right. So what do you do with a function? If you want to access the contents of the function, you have to invoke it, right? So all I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, because this returns a function, and that function requires a parameter called year of birth, it's actually a function, and I'm going to pass it the year of birth. And you can see it here when I hover over it. It's saying this is actually a function that accepts one parameter, we call the year of birth. Even though you don't see it anywhere else. Like, let's say you were like way down in the code. You see here, by the way, it says the function retirement accepts a retirement age, and inside it, there's another function that accepts a year of birth. You see that right there? How it shows the double execution?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, if you're ever stuck, you can use VS Code to kind of help you out. It gives you like a little bit of a hint there. Okay, so, yes. So I'm gonna copy this one here. Do you guys remember this one? It was, let's just say, example 2. You remember this one? Where it was like a function that has interview questions, right? And then let's just say we hide all this here. Okay, so similar deal, right? All we're going to say is var teacher question is equal to interview question, pass a teacher. This is review from the last class, remember? And I'm going to say teacher question is for John, or let's say Nick, I don't know, whatever. And then let's say var designer question. Wow, I don't know how to spell. Question is equal to interview question for a designer, right? And let's say the designer's name is Mary. I don't know, whatever. Do you remember this? What subject do you teach, Nick? Mary, can you please explain what UX is? Remember this simple one? And then if it's any other, like for example, if it is var some other prof, I don't know, is equal to interview question, let's say painter, thing. Artist. That's what I was thinking of. So let's just say some other profession. Let's just say Lara is an artist. And he goes, hello, Lara, what do you do? Do you remember this stuff, guys? We touched on this?
Yeah.
Cool. I know, Lisa, you didn't see this before.
No, but I'll watch the video tomorrow.
Cool. But this kind of makes sense. All it says is this is a function returning a function, okay? Which is very similar to closures, okay? But essentially what's happening is we have the conditional, and it says, okay, so here's a job. It accepts a job. If the job is a certain type, then just return a function that logs a sentence. Nothing crazy. And essentially, what we're doing here is this very, very similar to this, to method number 1, right? Method number 2 also works. So you could say interview question, let's say teacher, and this is where Celia remembered, which I'm very proud, by the way, Celia. This does the exact same thing. Let's just grab this one here. Right? What subject do you teach, Nick? You see that? It's the same thing. Okay, cool. So, how do we turn this into a closure? That's the million-dollar question. Knowing what you know now about closures, what do you think I should do to make this a closure? Like, let's translate this into a closure. Any takers? Derek? Celia? No takers? Okay. Let's go with this here. I'm assuming you guys want me to do it. Not a problem. So let's close this out. Okay, so let's... Okay, before I continue, are there any questions about the actual interview question function? Like the actual functionality? Any questions about functions returning a function?
No.
Cool. So let's start kind of dissecting this problem. So what do we know about closures? We know that closure is a function that returns a function, right? So closure, function returning a function, right? And we're going to invoke it. We're going to keep these bad boys up here. Yes, let's keep these here. Let's do that, and let's do this, and we're going to see that they both work. Okay? So, let's say we do, okay, let's say we say a function called interview questions, interview question, which accepts a job again. It returns a function, anonymous, which one, whatever, we'll call it that. It returns an anonymous function which accepts a name. Okay? It's no different, right? A job and a name, right? The only difference now is instead of having an if statement, right? Because here we go, if the job equals this, return this function. If the job equals that, return this function. Otherwise, return this function, right? So the way a closure works, the way we translate it to a closure is we no longer need to return multiple functions. We can put all the logic into one return statement. And this is actually, you're going to see this a lot in the wild. Like maybe you may or may not use it in your own code base, but you're going to see this in every single JavaScript programming job that you're going to take. So if you're going to be working with JavaScript, you're going to see this a lot. And there's not much to it. Like we're still going to use an if else, right? Else if, right? And then here we're going to do an else. And then we're going to say whatever. So if the job is equal to, what was the second one? Let's say designer. Okay, so we're going to do something if it equals a designer. And here we're going to say something if it equals a teacher. Right? And then else, we know what the else is all about. So let's just say we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. So we're literally going to use the same console logs. And what subject do you teach? And who's the designer? Can you tell me what UX is? Cool. You see how there's no difference? So this actually refactors this. This is a little bit harder to follow, but it's essentially, we're kind of following the same convention and then reducing. So all that we did last week just boils down to literally this, which is a closure. I mean, we did a lot of other stuff, but it leads up to one of the most important yet advanced concepts. And I'll be honest with you, if you can get past this little ditty, you're going to be in a really good place, because a lot of people just don't understand closures at all. They don't get it. They don't want to deal with it. And it's just code that they'll just pass off to other people. So if you can not only explain it, but understand it and use it, it will be like a really good marketable and valuable skill. It will make your life as a programmer a lot easier too. And like this here, where you would have like, for example, users. Like for example, this could be a function where it's like role, right? So, you log onto an app and it checks to see what your role is, right? And then it'll say, okay, if your role is admin, for example, then you're allowed to do all this stuff. If your role is like, let's say, a team member, not an administrator, then you can do all of this other stuff. Otherwise, you're just a user visiting the site. Like, do you see how this is kind of going? Where like the use cases are for this? Cool.
So the example on top is just kind of. So this is not considered a closure, right?
This here, no. Technically, it's not considered a closure. But this is. And the reason why, okay, is because you see here, we're passing in the variable job, right? And the variable job is used in the scope of a totally different function after interview question is finished. So you run interview questions here, it's done. It actually returns this particular function. Whereas this one here, it accepts the job, passes in the job, and then it accepts, then you start using name. So you use the job as a conditional for it. Does that make sense?
Yes. I know.
So like again, this one here, the job, it's only used in the if statement. So once the if statement runs that job and decides which one of the three options it's going to use, that that job variable is done. It's never used anywhere. It's never called. It's it's like there's nothing to it. It's done, right? Where the main difference is here, and this is where like you need a little bit of level of abstraction, and you need to kind of understand. You need to get past that, and that is literally that the variable here. It's actually not used for logic inside the parent function. It's actually used for logic inside the return function, which actually lives separately because interview question, that function has already returned. It's done. So if we go back to execution context, right? So let's see if we can get something. Execution, current context, execution, global execution. Let's see. Execution stack. Well, there's synonyms, which kind of makes sense. Who has... Okay, I think this here might be... Okay. Okay, cool. This is actually a good one. So, first function, second function, third function, right? So you call first. First calls the second, second calls the third. Third just consoles a name, right? This is callbacks. Now, let's not worry too much about it, but let's say the first function is called, which in this case, it would be interview question, right? Hello, make bigger. Okay, parser. Yes, this is great. Yep. Where are you? This is it. Okay, cool. Execution context, variable object, scope chain, this variable. Oh, this is beautiful. Okay. So basically the idea is this. Actually, I'm going to save this. This is really nice. And we're going to do regex one of these days. Have you guys done any regex before?
Yeah.
Have you done a lot of regex?
I can understand like the basic.
It sucks.
Yeah. There's a lot of flags and stuff like that.
It sucks. Yeah, I agree. I spent like an hour on regex today trying to figure out how to match a pattern for Canadian postal codes and U.S. postal codes in its own function. It sucked, but it's done. It's because we were getting errors at our shopping cart checkout. Okay, cool. So let's go back here. So we call the first function. So we agree this is the first function, right? So you call this. It pops onto the execution context. First function. What does that mean? It means that every single variable comes along for a ride. Okay? Now, we call the second one, right? Actually, before we call the second one, what happens is we call the first one, it runs the code, okay? This is where we call the first one, okay? So let's put it into more visual. So we say, interview question, pass in a teacher. Interview question, pass in a teacher, right? So we run that function, it returns. So what does it return? Return means it's finished. So it goes into the execution context, runs the code, right? Runs the code. It returns a function, and then it pops off. It like pops off. We then call the second function, pass in the name, but what ends up happening is, and this is built into JavaScript, because of lexical scope, nested functions, lexical scope, the second function that's returned actually carries along the package. So the first one is popped, the second one now becomes the first in line, and it actually has access to all the variables, including job, in the same way that you do this. Was that more confusing, or did that help out?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Cool. Lisa? Derek?
By default, I'm always yes. I'll tell you if no.
All right.
By default, I'm always going to go back and restudy.
So your default was no, Lisa?
Well, I missed the whole first 2 weeks, so
Don't worry. Don't worry. Give yourself more credit, man. Because, like, honestly, I mean, I gave them my anecdote. I literally started with nothing. I was like -5 programming before.
Even after the bootcamp?
Even after the boot. Martin, you.
No, because I know you didn't. I know your bootcamp didn't go over JavaScript. That's why.
Yeah. No. So, like, it gave me really, really, really solid computer science foundationals. Like, I understood a lot, and it helped me pick up JavaScript. And you're totally right. They didn't really go over JavaScript very much. But again, from my personal experience, I can tell you that once you know and are comfortable enough to start writing code or solving problems with one language, it is not hard to look at another language and relate it. So one of the tricks, if you want to call it that, that I used was, okay, how does JavaScript console log? Okay. How does Ruby console log? Oh, okay. How does JavaScript declare a function? Oh, okay, that's how it does it. How does Ruby declare a function? Oh, okay. And like you just try to relate it to what you know. And you're gonna find out really, really fast how quickly you can get your up and running on a new language. It's crazy. Like I went in trying to learn JavaScript and I was just like, if I have to go through the same thing I went through that boot camp, I'm gonna shoot myself. And that's the expectation that I had. And okay, at the beginning it's hard, and then you pick up steam, but you pick up steam exponentially faster. Like it was crazy how fast. And like I look back and I was like, wait a minute, I'm like doing much more advanced stuff and giving it 1/4 of the thought. So again, as a takeaway, we all have imposter syndrome. Like at work, like I was mentioning when we first started recording today, is like if I don't feel like it's the hardest thing to do, if I don't feel like I'm gonna run into a wall and cry a little bit, I'm not doing the right thing. I might as well just move on because I'm just being stagnant and I'm not evolving, right? And that's part of the challenge. That's actually what drives me into computer science. But you know, to each their own, right? Anyways, I want to do something else, but I do have to go. I think this is a lot right now. We went through some callbacks. We went through how a lot of this stuff works. Closures is a big, big deal. We translated some of this stuff. So, okay, cool. For the next class, we're going to do something called bind, call, and apply. Okay? And then from there, we're going to move on to ES6. And we're going to do like a super deep dive into ES6. So actually, I have a question for you guys. What would you prefer? Would you prefer that we create our own library, like an Ajax library, and then try to look at like async and promises, callback, like do a library that kind of like how you guys do npm install and then you bring a library and then you start using it. Would you guys like to see how that works and how you import stuff and how to use modules? Or would you, with like, obviously like async and promises and stuff, or would you rather just do like a deep dive into ES6 after we do bind, call, and apply?
I'd rather do the first one.
Build a library?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on that one too.
Yeah. So
I agree. Yes.
Cool.
interesting.
So what we'll do is we'll finish off bind, call, and apply, which are like super, super great. What bind, call, and apply as a preview is it lets you do two things. It lets you set the this keyword, okay? And call lets you use methods from another object's prototype without inheritance. Okay? Which is a big, big, powerful thing. So again, I'll repeat. Call and bind. What they do is they let you rescope the this keyword. Okay? Apply. Actually, am I saying something wrong here? Let me see. I took a note. Call method. Yeah. So call and apply. Yeah, call and bind. Yes. So call lets you basically use methods from another object. So remember we did inheritance, right? So let's say you have like a, I don't know, person object, and let's say you have, I don't know, person object, and let's say you had like, I don't know, a fruit object, and let's say you did like fruit dot prototype dot is ripe, for example, right? Is equal to a function whatever, right? Let's say you wanted to find out if the person is ripe. You can't do that without inheritance, right? Especially if they're two different objects. Well, that's where we're going to see some cool stuff coming in. And how that works is when you bring a library and you want to use, like, let's say a call, you want to call a method from a different library onto something completely different, but you don't want to import the whole thing, you can actually just use the call method. All right? So that's a preview, okay, guys?
Perfect.
And then we'll get into building our own library and having a little fun with that. We'll do like some Chuck Norris jokes, API. We'll do like some stuff like that. We'll build our own API, and then we'll do like iterations of it. One with promises, one with async await, one from like 1998 to see how far JavaScript has come, one with fetch. And I'll show you how to do fetch without .then. You know how you guys use .then on everything? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll show you how to do it without .then in a modern way with like literally 2 lines of code, or maybe 3 lines. Cool.
Okay.
All right. All right. Was today's lesson helpful at all?
Yes.
I'll go with yes.
Yeah, it's good.
No, it's. I'm trying to like keep it within context, but still, like hard enough where you guys are pushing your level, right? Because otherwise, what's the point, right? But I don't want to like lose you guys to where you're like, what the hell is going on, right? And I think it's important. Like, you see this right here. Like, I don't know why they never taught any of this stuff. This is like incredibly important. Like, the execution context is actually an object, and that object has all the variables. It has the scope chain and then this variable. Look where the execution context lives, on the global scope. Every single function that gets put on top of the stack inherits from the global context. So when you see something like a closure, when it pops off, it still has the scope. It still has this, and it still has the variable object. That's how closures work. Anyways. Okay, you guys have a good night, okay?
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Right.
try to put it. By the way, the video is up. It's on YouTube. I explained to the other guys how that worked. It was annoying as heck. So it takes a couple of days for me to like format it and then put it up. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
So the video is up there. I'm gonna post it on the YouTube link, okay? Okay, so good night for now. Ciao.
Hey.
Right.
Okay,